In the 1940s, the story goes, American troops landed on a remote island. This is the first time that the native islanders had ever seen modern civilization. So they were amazed as they watched the troops unload all this material. They set up a landing strip. They cleared the jungle and set up a landing strip. They built a tower. They donned headphones. And they called great birds filled with cargo down from the sky. And when the birds landed, shares of the cargo were distributed amongst the islanders, ushering in a period of peace and prosperity and comfort. Eventually, the war ended. The troops left. They packed up their landing strip. They took down the tower. They put away their headphones. And they sailed away. And the cargo stopped coming. So, of course, the islanders did the rational thing to do. They cleared the jungle. They made a landing strip out of woven bamboo. They built a tower. They carved headphones out of wood. Their chief climbed the tower and called to the great birds. And nothing came. Years later, when researchers found the island, they named this odd religion where the islanders still called to the sky, called for the birds to come with the cargo. They named it a cargo cult. You know, it wasn't because they had coconut headphones and bamboo landing strips. Even if they had a real landing strip, even if they had an actual air traffic control tower, even if they had real headphones, even if all that equipment had worked, the cargo would not come. Because they didn't know about the vast industrial infrastructure behind the cargo. They didn't know about the factories making the material, the men loading it onto the planes, the logistical planning required to send an airplane halfway around the world to do an airlift to a remote island. They knew nothing of that. And that's the tragedy of the cargo cult. Adherence to a superficial idea without understanding what really makes it work. All right, we'll come back to that. So, Sydney, Agile Australia, are you having a good time? Yeah. You've had a chance to sit here and wake up, so I would expect a more enthusiastic response than Linda. Are you having a good time? Yeah, all right. What do you think about Agile? Good stuff? Oh, jeez. I'm done. Let's try that again. What do you think about Agile? Yeah, it's great stuff. Look at all this, look at all this great stuff we get out of it. Revenue and business engagement, customer satisfaction, morale, higher ROI. I've seen every single one of these things. Speed to market. It's all real. It really does happen. And we get all these fun rituals. Planning poker. Everybody loves planning poker, right? 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13. There's nothing like swiping some ideas from a dead Italian mathematician to add a little zing to your idea. As a something I want, something else, so that whatever. That's, I mean, can you imagine doing Agile without that template? It's fantastic. Of course, stand-ups and the sprint backlog. I love Agile. I have one little question for you. How does this lead to this? You know, for many people, it doesn't. For some people, well, if you go on to a discussion forum, say Reddit or Hacker News, and you find somebody talking about Agile, you will find many people saying things like this. We tried Agile, and it was a complete waste of time. We were micromanaged to hell and back. It was the worst experience of my life. I hate you and everything you stand for. I cry a little bit, and then I feel better. So what's going on here? How is it that some people are seeing this, and some people are seeing this? What is going on? What is the difference? How do we get from this to this? These things are the coconut headphones and the bamboo landing strip of the Agile world. Yes, the people who do Agile well and see those benefits do something like this. But this isn't where the cargo comes from. This isn't what makes Agile work. It's just what people do as part of making Agile work. So, the question is, where does the cargo come from? Excuse me. You know, I get terribly nervous. Well, before we start talking about where the cargo comes from, we should talk about what Agile is. And really, deep down, Agile isn't much of anything. So back in the 90s, there was a lot of people doing software and a lot of conflict and concern about software development. It was called the software crisis. So in an effort to make software development work, the prevailing belief of the time is that we just need to plan better. If we do better planning and we execute on those plans, everything will just work. So, and in an effort to make this work, the plans were made increasingly detailed, and the decisions about how plans were supposed to be made were made increasingly detailed, and the roles were specified in more detail. And you ended up with these big bookshelves full of binders describing exactly how software would be developed. You will do this, you will do this, you will do this. It was kind of dehumanizing, actually. And these binders had things like descriptions of what the roles were going to be, phase gates, change control boards, which are really a way of saying no, functional requirement specifications, software architecture documents, workflow specifications, on and on and on and on and on. Martin Fowler called it the almighty thud for the sound it made when the stack of binders was dropped off on your doorstep when you started a project. And it didn't work. The Standish Group conducted a survey, an annual survey, starting in 1995. I believe they still do it, and seeing how projects went. And by the standards of the day, they found that only 1/6 of those projects were succeeding, and 1/3 of them were failing outright. This was called, again, the software crisis. Also in the 90s, there were people who were looking at developing an alternative, something that was a little more rehumanizing, something that was more flexible, simpler, slimmer, less prescriptive, didn't have that almighty thud. They had names, the methods had names like adaptive software development, Crystal, feature-driven development, DSDM, extreme programming, Scrum. Now, back in the 90s, 3 people were very influential in the methodology movement. They were James Roomba, Ivar Jakobsen, and Grady Booch. They were called the 3 Amigos. And one thing that they were doing is they were trying to bring their ideas together for their methods, bring these all together into a unified process. They had made a unified modeling language, UML, a way to describe, stuff to put into these documents. And they were creating a unified process, which became known as the rational unified process, because they unified so much they actually created a company together. Well, these other methods, these more humane methods, they were called lightweight methods in reaction to the heavyweight methods that you found on these binders of bookshelves. And in 2001, 17 of the people who were working on these lightweight methods got together at a ski resort. They made plans to get together at a ski resort for 2 days in Utah. Now, that wasn't everybody who was working on lightweight methods. It was just the people who could come. The people who were thought to be invited, the people who could come. And feelings were fairly mixed about whether anything would come out of this. Alistair Cockburn said afterwards, "I personally didn't expect this particular group of people to ever agree on something substantial." And after 2 days, they really only accomplished 3 things. First, from all reports, Martin Fowler demonstrated a novel approach for skiing on your head. Second, they came up with the name Agile, which really is a triumph of marketing, because before that they were called lightweight methodologists. And if they hadn't come up with the name Agile, what you would have here is a lightweight presenting to a meeting of lightweights, which I don't know about you, I'm happier with Agile. And they came up with 4 values. So it was actually fairly substantial after all. But there was no unified Agile methodology. There was talk of, let's get together and see, what if we have something in common like the RUP people do. There's no unified Agile methodology. There's just these 3 things. There never has been, and I don't think there ever will be a unified Agile methodology. What we have is a brilliant name, 4 values, and 12 principles that were hashed out over email and a wiki in the couple of months that followed. So in other words, Agile is a philosophy. It's not something you do. There is no Agile method. Agile is a way of thinking about the world. At most, it's something you are, not something you do. And somehow, this fuzzy, wuzzy, wibbly-wobbly stuff with a cool name became a huge hit. And here we are, 14 years later. There's 1,000 of you in the audience. Agile has won. The almighty thud is either extinct or you're here to make it extinct in your organization. Now, I think part of the reason it won is because it actually worked. In 2013, Scott Ambler conducted a survey for Dr. Dobbs magazine, rest in peace. And they found that by the standards that those companies held themselves by, 64% of their projects were success, 6% failed outright for the Agile projects. All this from a fuzzy, wuzzy, wibbly, wobbly philosophy. But the thing about fuzzy, wuzzy, wibbly, wobbly philosophies is that they're hard to pin down. Really, it means whatever you want it to mean. And for a lot of people who are hearing it for the first time, hearing that we want to bring Agile into our organization, what it means is exactly what we're doing now with a cooler name. Yeah, we're Agile now. Let's take off that other sticker and put Agile over the top of it. We're good to go. Any of you experienced that? How many of you are willing to raise your hands? OK, so about half of you who are willing to raise your hands have experienced it. So it often means what we already do. And this has been especially great for people with something to sell. Because you can take what you're already doing, call it Agile, there's no trademark on the term, and voila, Agile. But for the people who want to be Agile, for the people who really want their organization to start thinking, their teams to start being Agile, to think and follow this philosophy, it's not so great. The people who want to be Agile are often not the people who are the ones buying Agile. The buyers want promises, they want action, they want movement, and you can't easily buy a way of thinking that's expressed in 24 words. So instead, they buy sprints and stories and scrums. Oh, I skipped a couple of slides. Sprints, stories, scrums, bamboo runways, coconut headphones, action, movement, ceremonies, ritual, cult leaders. And the cargo doesn't arrive. Several years ago, Diana Larson and I were lamenting the state of Agile. Actually, what we were doing was we were supposed to be working on a training course together, and what we were actually doing was procrastinating, as you do. And we got to talking about something that her son Willem was working on. He has a nonprofit called Language Hunters, which is dedicated to the idea of rescuing endangered languages. All over the world, native languages, small little languages, are real human languages, not JavaScript. That's in no danger. All over the world, these little languages are dying out as the last native speakers die. So Language Hunters is dedicated to restoring these languages. And what's interesting to me and to Diana about Language Hunters is the technique that they use for learning languages. It's called language hunting. Now, if you learn a language, in the US anyway, there's something called the ACTFL scale. It describes 4 levels of proficiency. And as Willem describes it, he likes to talk about Tarzan at the party. He likes to talk about going to a party. So the first level of proficiency is, again, Tarzan at the party. It's basic nouns and maybe some verbs. So you go to the party and you say, beer, or girl. And that's sort of the extent of what you can do. Some people are more proficient than that. They can talk about going to the party. Where is the party? How do I get to the party? Will Jane be there? Third level proficiency is discussing the party. How'd the party go last night? Hey, did Jane talk about me? Do you think she'd be okay with me dragging her back to my cave later on tonight? And fourth is what he called Charlie Rose on parties. Charlie Rose is sort of a thoughtful talk show host in the US. So he might say something like, what is society's obligations to these parties? Do we need to regulate how many girls are dragged off to caves? 4 different levels of proficiency in language. Now, what really fascinated Diana and I was that language hunting, because it's about rescuing languages, it's not just about creating proficiency, it's about creating fluency. Fluent proficiency. Fluency is how you can behave when you're under pressure. So if the secret police stomps into your room at 4 a.m. and says, where were you last night? Even if normally you can talk about the party and Jane and so forth, but at that moment all you can do is say, at party, then you are fluent at the first level of language proficiency. Fluency is unconscious competence. And language hunting really emphasizes developing fluency at any level of proficiency so that these languages could be rescued. And if you ever have a chance, Willem comes to some Agile conferences, so if you ever have a chance to run into him at a conference, ask him to do a 1-hour language hunt with you because it is amazing. There's all kinds of things involved for rapid learning in Language Hunters that I'm not going to describe now that you should try out. Anyway, Diana and I were procrastinating. We're thinking about how these ideas might play out in the Agile world. And we realized that we really liked the idea of fluency as applied to Agile, because we see a lot of variance in proficiency in people who do Agile. And what we'd like to see is we'd like to say, hey, there's no you are Agile, you aren't Agile. There's just levels, various points at which people are proficient. And if you can be fluent at any of those levels, then you're in good shape. If fluency in software development is what happens when the CTO comes stomping into the room at 4 o'clock on Friday afternoon and says, where's my software? How come this isn't done yet? How do you behave? Do you fall back to just running around and saying, we're going to get that to you right away. Let's forget about these tests. Let's forget about these stories. We're all going back to our cubes, heads down, start programming. I had somebody tell me once, we can't do pair programming because we need more keyboards banging out code. I was like, sure, go down to the local electronics store, buy a lot of keyboards. You'll be fine. You don't need me. Just plug them in. So we thought about this, and we started looking at all the different ways we saw teams do Agile, and we developed it into a model. And this one we did trademark, not because we don't want to share it. This is actually freely available at agilefluency.com. You can download it, put it in your presentations. It's licensed. There's a copyright that says you can do whatever you want with it. But we did trademark it so that when people are talking about Agile fluency, they're talking about this and not something else. Now, the statistician George Box said, all models are wrong, but some models are useful. This model is wrong. It is not an accurate reflection of the world. It is a diagram. And it's useful. In the course of producing this, we workshopped it with, we took it to Agile Open Northwest Conference. It was in Seattle that year. We shared it with a bunch of our colleagues. We talked to practitioners and executives and consultants. And what we heard back was that this is a pretty good reflection of how we see teams grow, how we see teams learn. Martin Fowler was one of the people who looked at it. He liked it and asked if he could publish it on his website. So now, if you go to agilefluency.com, it'll actually, that's just a short link. It'll take you to the article on Martin's site. It's natural when you see something like this with stars to assume that 4-star is better than 3-star. And if you're 1-star, you're kind of shit, aren't you? It's natural to think that. And we wouldn't mind if more people were 2-star or 3-star, but this is not a maturity model. This isn't something that says you're not mature until you reach the end. What this is a description of a path. All the destinations are valuable if you reach fluency at any one of these points. Even if you're just fluent at building code, the very beginning. If you have an organization that's very good at building code and shipping without using any Agile ideas whatsoever, that is just fine. Fluency at any level is good. It's like if you want to go on a vacation. You could go to the Harbor Islands. That's a nice stop. You could go to New Zealand. That's also a nice stop. You could go to the US and visit the Grand Canyon. That's also a nice stop. Each stop that you could go to is further away. It takes more effort. And if you're just out for a nice day picnic, flying to the US to the Grand Canyon may not be the best use of your time. Similarly with this model, each of these stops is a nice stop, and which stop you should choose depends on what you're interested in. What we've found is that teams tend to grow in a certain way, and that's what we've described here. Some teams are fluent at focusing on value. They're able to discuss what they're doing from a business perspective rather than a technical perspective that you see in teams that are not trying to do Agile. They're able to change direction when requested, and they provide a lot of transparency into what's going on. Some teams do that, and they also deliver reliably. They have low defects, and they can provide predictability if they need to. They have high morale because the code's good to work with, and it's not painful. Some teams do all that, and they also own the business model. They understand what they're building and why. They have responsibilities for features. They have responsibility for their market and their product, their direction. They're truly adaptive. This is what Agile talks about when they say what Agile gives you, the ability to change direction to respond to the market. Teams that are fluent at this third star have that ability because they own the plans. They make their own plans, and those plans are about learning. Do you see the problem here? Let me repeat that. Fluent three-star teams have responsibility over features, dates, product direction. Many three-star teams don't share dates at all. In fact, many of them don't even have a roadmap beyond this is what we're working on right now, and this is what we think we might work on next. Because what they're doing is they're learning from each release. They're releasing fairly frequently, typically, depending on what the market will take. And as they try things, as they conduct experiments, they use that knowledge to change what they work on. Would that work in your organization? Hey, boss, just tell me what market you want us to work on. We'll take total responsibility for it. We're not going to tell you anything about our roadmap. No, we are not going to do a yearly budget, God no. But we will just deliver software to you on a frequent cadence, and we will demonstrate how the customers are reacting. That's good, right? Would that fly in your organization? Oh, come on, at least one hand. Thank you. Are you telling me the truth? Nobody. It doesn't really matter how good your teams are. If that's the case, if your company won't allow you to make that sort of changing adaptive planning, you can't have a three-star team. Not until the organization's ready for it. So that's the secret of the cargo. Agile is about how you think. It's about how you approach your problem. It's not about the practices you use. The practice is a result of how you think and approach the problem. Practices can be useful to teach you that thinking, but it's not what makes Agile works. And what your organization thinks is often going to override what you think. So, your success with Agile, your ability to get that sweet, sweet cargo, is based largely on your organizational culture and the investments your organization is willing to make. Team fluency reflects the organization more than the team. So if you're not seeing the types of fluency I'm describing here, don't look at the people and say, what's wrong with you? Look at the organization and the system that it has created. Now, this is a team model. This is not an organizational fluency model. This is a team fluency model. I'm not even sure if organizational fluency makes sense because we're talking about grinding up people. It's all made of people. So team fluency involves the people on those teams. And you can start to set expectations. So if you're not getting what you want from your teams, look at the organization. If you're starting to adopt Agile, set expectations about what you're going to need from the organization. And if the organization isn't supporting you, don't despair. Don't despair. There was a company, I actually, at the Agile Open Northwest conference a couple of years ago, I talked to somebody who worked for Visa, the credit card folks. And he had a team that was very solidly two-star Agile. They could deliver whatever they wanted, whenever they wanted. And by the way, when I say two-star Agile delivering on the market cadence, I don't mean delivering everything that the market wants. I just mean the ability to deliver whatever you have at that point on a regular cadence. Anyway, they had that ability. But it was Visa's policy that teams like theirs create and adhere to a yearly budget and roadmap. So every year they had to create a budget and a roadmap, and at the end of the year, if they had met that roadmap, they were successful. If they hadn't, they weren't. They wanted to be a 3-star team. They wanted to be able to change direction, but you can't change direction when you've got a yearly budget to adhere to. So what did they do? Did they give up? No. Instead, they worked really well on those yearly roadmaps. They delivered reliably, and they went to their manager and said, look at the things that we could do. We have some ideas about how we could become more agile and we could do even better. And the manager said, yeah, you're very capable of delivering on a regular basis. He said, let's see what we can do. And they went to his manager and said, look at this team. They're really good at delivering. But they have some more ideas. They'd like to go further than that. And they went to their manager, and they went to their manager. And they went all the way to the CEO of Visa, who looked at their performance and said, yeah, you're really good at delivering. And you want to try something else? OK. Approved. And now, this team is judged on their ability to meet market metrics: net profit per employee, customer satisfaction, return on investment. They do not have any sort of yearly budget or roadmap. It took 5 years. And that's actually what generally causes a gap between 2-star and 3-star teams. It takes time for the organization to trust the team. But they got there. I don't think Visa as a whole was changed, but that team got to the 3-star fluency. So what I'm saying that organizational culture controls your fluency, I don't mean that you have to change the entire organization. I just mean that you have to look at how it affects your team. So what kind of investments are needed? Well, here's a little secret for you. Agile works by changing the rules of the game. Remember, Agile is a way of thinking about the world. It doesn't work because stories are amazing or because all these other practices are particularly better than anything else. It doesn't make magic unicorns who can produce more than anybody else. What we do is we cheat. We cheat shamelessly, and I love it. We take what other people say must be done, and we say we're not going to do that anymore. And that's what allows us to see the results when we're talking about that cargo. So if you want to have a 1-star team, if you want to have a team that's fluent at demonstrating progress from a business perspective and has the ability to redirect, then, well, you need a group that's going to work as a team. That's really all there is to it. I mean, yeah, there's a little bit of learning how to talk in terms of business results instead of technical results, and that's a bit challenging for some people. Particularly programmers want to talk about the design and architecture rather than business results, but it can be learned. A big part of what 1-star is working as a team. There was a company that wanted a team to try this idea. There's an experience report on it by Teasley. I've got the link for it, and if you're interested, you can come get it from me. And they tried putting their team together in a shared workspace and having them all work together, just to try the idea out. And what they found was that that team delivered to market in 1/3 the time that they had previously delivered software. Not cut by 1/3, in 1/3 the time. So if it had previously taken them 3 months, now it took 1 month. They also said that they doubled productivity, but I don't know how that was measured, so I don't trust it. But they delivered in 1/3 the time. Did the team magically get more productive? No. What they did was they allocated people 100% to the work that they were working on. They kept the team together so that they went through that sort of difficult Tuckman model of forming, storming, norming, and performing, and stayed at the higher end of it. And they worked in the same workspace so that whenever they had a question, they didn't send off an email and get a response 3 days later. What they did was they said, hey, Bill, what do you think about this? They cheated, in other words. So if you'd like to see these kinds of one-star fluencies, that's where to look. Remove impediments to teamwork, ensure 100% allocation to a team, keep teams together, create shared workspaces. The first one, removing impediments to teamwork, I want to especially highlight. Because what I'm talking about is classic HR impediments. There's a large semiconductor company in Oregon called Intel that practiced something called rank and yank, or maybe competitive ranking. How many of you have heard of rank and yank? How many of you practice it in your organizations? Nobody's admitting to it. Good for you. Hide that unpleasant truth. Rank and yank says that in an organization, we've got a bell curve of performance. 20% of our people are going to be exceptional, 20% are going to be crap, and the rest are going to be sort of in the middle. So what we need to do is identify the exceptional people and reward them. We need to identify the crap people and fire them, and the people in the middle will give another chance. The way this plays out, unfortunately, is that you go through and you go through and you go through, and managers just said, find the 20% that's best, the 20% that's worst, and then they say to their subordinates, find the 20% that's best and the 20% that's worst, and they said, well, and now you got a 5-person team. And one of them's going to be exceptional, and one of them's going to get fired. And they know this. And do you think this type of environment encourages teamwork? Do you think this kind of environment creates a situation where people say, I'm going to set aside my personal goals so that we can get more done together as a team? Does that happen? No. So one of the hardest things to do to get one-star fluency is to take out those HR impediments. Because, frankly, they are destructive to teamwork. The other one in here that often I get a lot of pushback on, creating a shared workspace. How many of you have a distributed team? Yeah. The Teasley report, where they cut their time to market to one-third, they had distributed teams too, and one of the big investments they made was putting them together. Now, I know that not all of you can do that. Not all of you have influence over that, and that's OK. If you can put people together, you'll see a lot of benefits from it. When I say shared workspace, though, I don't mean giant room where everybody's talking over everybody else at the same time. God, that's a terrible idea. What I'm talking about is a team room that is sound isolated from the other team rooms in the organization. If you're distributed, you need a virtual team space. And people ask me, well, what software should we use for that? I don't know. But you need something that's going to create that ability to get an instant response from other people on the team, to get this sort of sense of what other people are doing via software if you're not going to be together. That's what I mean by a shared workspace. Now, some people, in addition to gaining fluency at this one-star level, also want to have fluency at a second level of proficiency. This is the ability to deliver on the market cadence, to see low-defect software, have that high morale, have some predictability. Teams that are fluent at the second star can predict. They don't always choose to, but they can, because the variance is low enough in their work that predictions are actually not that hard. Now, this is the most skill-intensive of all the fluency levels, so it's a really good idea to hire mentors here if you can. There was a company that I worked with that worked for the health insurance industry, and when they brought me in, their software team had not delivered to market in 1.5 years. And they were thinking about, and it was very dysfunctional. When I interviewed them, every single person told me that everything would be OK if they just fired that person there, except that it sort of went around in a circle where everybody was pointing at the next person. So the company knew that things were very difficult, but their software ran the company. Health insurance in the US is highly regulated. The regulations change. The software had to change to keep up. And if the software didn't change, the company would go out of business. They were thinking about outsourcing this, but then they would have nothing to differentiate them from all the other people who did health insurance processing. So they were in a real bind. So they decided to invest in improving the situation. They were sort of a last-ditch attempt. They hired Arlo Belshi to work with the team for 9 months. When they started, they had 7 different code bases. They merged those all back together. They're forks, for those of you who are programmers. They merged them all back together. They figured out how to test drive cold fusion, of all things. They figured out how to do database migrations, automated database migrations. And last time I talked to those folks, they told me, yeah, now when we want to ship, what we do is we go to the pub, we take out the iPhone app we wrote, and we press the big red button that we programmed in the iPhone, and it ships the software. They did run into a little snag. Once they got down to being able to ship every month, the rest of the business said, oh, ho, 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 too fast. So it took them a little while to get over that. And now they ship a couple times a week. So hiring a mentor is useful to reach this second star of fluency. Also, it takes time to learn these ideas. It takes time to really become experienced with test-driven development and refactoring. And if you're in a typical organization, you probably have a fair amount of technical debt. That has to be paid down to the point where you can start shipping on a reliable basis. All of that takes time. So as in an organization, what you can do to support 2-star fluency is say, hey, we understand that this is going to take time, that productivity is going to go down. Give space for that. And then once you get to this point, the team needs to do refactoring and cleanup every single week. Every day, the software needs to be better than it was the day before. The way you do that is with something called Slack. If you don't provide Slack, then the software gets worse. Then you can't ship reliably. It's got to get a little bit better every day. That's the Boy Scout rule. Always leave it better than you found it. And this can be challenging for some organizations, the technical disciplines need to come into the team. QA becomes part of the team. Operations is integrated with the team. DevOps, they call it nowadays. And if you do that, and you give people time, you can reach a second level of fluency. Now, when I ask people to self-rate their team's fluency, and I think people self-rate high, actually, about 45% of the audience says our teams are fluent at the first star. About 1/3 say our teams are fluent at the second star. About 5% say our teams are fluent at this third star. That's because this one, more than any of the others, really requires organizational buy-in. Because what you have with 3-star teams is teams that own their market. They have the expertise as part of the team, not a product owner who comes by every once in a while, not a product owner who goes out and asks permission from other people. They own the market. I worked with a company that wanted to, they were a startup. They were actually a very entrepreneurial company. They'd been around for 20 years, but they acted like a startup. And they had a lot of products, and they wanted to see more market result. So the CTO brought me in, and then we sat down with the CEO, and we looked at the fluency model. I said, which of these is right for you? And he said, we want 3-star. I said, OK, well, let's make sure that that's something that can fly here. And we did some investigation. And it turned out that 3-star Agile was a good thing for them. They wanted to move their entire company, all the teams in their company, to doing 3-star, to be 3-star teams. So what we had to do is we had to look at where's the expertise? What markets are each of these teams going to serve? Which products correspond to those markets? And we did this very intensive exercise where we looked at every single thing that the company produced and how that mapped to markets, and which of those things they wanted to continue to pursue, and which of them were just a millstone. And we designed teams around those market segments. And then we asked everybody to self-organize onto the teams, and that's a great story, and ask me sometime about that. These teams, when they were done, had technical people on them, yes. They were cross-functionally technical. They had QA. There was a DevOps presence, although they didn't have enough DevOps people, operations people, for every team to have a DevOps person on it. And every team had a product manager and a charter. And beyond the charter, they were responsible for their own business results. Part of the charter was, what are the business metrics that matter for this market segment? As a straw man. And the teams were expected to come up with their own metrics going forward. I talked to the CTO just last month and asked him how that went. We started it last year. He had a baby in the middle. The transition started, we did a bunch of the work, and then we sort of had people self-organize into their new teams, and then the kickoff was in July. He took paternity leave starting in November, was gone for 2 months, didn't ever check his email or anything. By the way, not being there is a great way for people to take responsibility. Sometimes when I'm working with teams, I suddenly start to develop a weak bladder. Anytime there's an important decision to make, oh, I got to go to the bathroom. So I asked him how it was going. He said, well, on one of our teams, just one of our teams, we were looking at what it takes to build our software. And we have this dependency on a third party that costs $40,000 a month. And the guys on the team figured out that if we wrote our own solution, we could do most of what that does and no longer pay that $40,000 a month. It was 2 weeks of effort, and now that team has saved the company $40,000 a month forever. I asked him if all the trouble of doing this realignment of the teams and creating cross-functional teams was worth it. He said, absolutely. That one thing alone has saved us a couple $100,000 a year. And I've got more stories like that. Now, if you want to see that kind of fluency on your teams, you don't have to. But if you do, the biggest thing is bringing that expertise into the team. Often in organizations, your product management and your marketing is over here, and your technical people are over here, and never the twain shall meet, except maybe throwing darts across the office at each other. So sometimes you have to build trust by being really good at the 2-star first, just like that Visa team did. But if you can, incorporate business experts in full-time with the team, give the teams responsibility for budgets and plans, and don't judge based on adherence to plans, but instead the business results that the team brings to you. So that's where the cargo comes from. Now, the Islanders believe that cargo comes from sprints and scrums and the planning game and from user stories. But now you know that's not really where it comes from. Cargo comes from this institutional investment, this infrastructure in culture, of culture and investments in enabling teams to be agile, to create this philosophy that's behind Agile of basically cheating by creating business results by having business expertise on the team. That's actually kind of obvious when you say it that way, isn't it? You just have to do it. And no amount of sprints and scrums will bring that expertise onto your team. Now again, fluency at any one of these levels is a good thing. Choose the stop that's right for you. For those of you in large enterprise organizations, 3-star is probably not a good idea. It's politically very challenging. Demonstrate results at 2-star first. For those of you in entrepreneurial sort of startup-y type environments, 3-star is a great place for you. So figure out where you want to be. Make those investments. Because remember that fluency of your teams depends on your organization more than the teams. And as you do, your teams will develop proficiency, and they will grow in fluency, and that cargo can be yours. So, decide what investments you need to make. Go out and make them. Go make some cargo. Thank you.